I would like to call the April 12th, 2023 City Council regular meeting to order. Will everyone stand and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Carey. Chilson.
Present.
Hutchings.
Here.
Nelson.
Present.
Parker.
Present.
Wackler.
Present.
Cassidy. Here. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next item is approval of agenda and consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda? Ms. Hutchings. May I have a second? Mr. Carey, thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda or consent agenda? Would the clerk please read the consent agenda?
Approval of minutes, the March 22nd, 2023 council regular meeting minutes. Under new business, we have ordinances, all of which were introduced by the city manager and are scheduled for public hearing on April 26th, 2023. First up is ordinance 2023-009, amending chapter 2.28 of the Soldotna Municipal Code, providing updates to the personnel code and authorizing programs from the recruitment and retention strategy. Ordinance 2023-010, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $10,000 in the general fund for a donation received from Debbie McCarthy. Ordinance 2023-011, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $500 in the general fund for a donation received from the Soldotna Elks Lodge 2706 for the 2023 Peninsula River Skate Figure Skating Competition. Ordinance 2023-012, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $78,565 in the COVID-19 Relief Special Revenue Fund by accepting grant funds provided by the State of Alaska Department of Health. Ordinance 2023-013, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $132,794.44 in the general fund and $132,794.44 in the debt service fund for debt service on the Field House General Obligation bonds. Resolutions on consent include Resolution 2023-024, ratifying two sole source purchases from Univar USA Inc. in the amounts of $25,200 and $37,620 for utility department chemicals, introduced by the city manager. Resolution 2023-025, authorizing the city manager to execute a contract with B&B Landscape in the amount of $49,898.50 for the Aspen Acres Landscaping Project, also introduced by the city manager. And last but not least, you have Action Memorandum 2023-008, vacation of a pedestrian easement within the new Homestead subdivision, brought to you by the city manager. And that is your consent agenda.
Thank you. Are there any public comments on any of the items just read by the clerk? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand. And if you would like to comment, app users by pressing the raise your hand button and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Is there anyone here in the council chambers wishing to speak on any item just read by the clerk? Seeing none, we'll go to Zoom, and looking at Zoom, I see no hands raised. Having no one wishing to speak, the approval of the agenda and consent agenda is back before the council. Are there any council objections to approving the agenda and consent agenda? Seeing none, the agenda and consent agenda are approved by unanimous consent. Moving on to the next item on the agenda is public comment and presentations, items other than those appearing on the agenda. 3 minutes per speaker, 20 minutes aggregate. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Yes, ma'am. Please step forward and State your name and address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes.
My name is Rebecca Heinsberger, and I'm from the greater Soldotna community, probably because Seelof would be a better description, so I'm not right in the city. What I have to bring up may not be extremely popular because I think you're done with this, but I'm concerned about June 3rd. That's the date of the Queer Joy event in the park, which you guys already dealt with the lewd amendment and voted it down. I don't know if any of you have looked at the website or the Facebook page of that group or seen any news, but they do have what's called a Queen's Guard of about 65 people that guard the event. And it's been happening in Anchorage. I'm concerned that there's a majority of people that are still very concerned that that's coming to Soldotna on June 3rd, especially in view of what happened last year. And apparently, most of the members of this board think that's freedom of expression to do the twerking with nude leotards or whatever it was that went on last year. They're inviting many more drag queens. And I don't know, Stephanie, maybe whether there's any address of parameters. Now, I have an event going on the next day in the park, and so I've applied through the Parks and Recreation, and I know you describe your event, and then it's applied for and considered by a committee. I don't know if you guys see the application, but so I know there's an application process and you're supposed to disclose everything that's going to happen at the event. But as you know, this event is largely attended by people from out of Soldotna, namely Anchorage. So we're going to be descended on by city people from Anchorage that do these events regularly with the Queen's Guard. And it's becoming more of an in-your-face type of event. And I'm concerned that there could be conflict at the event because there's a lot of conservative people that don't want to see this happen. So I'm bringing to your attention that it may not be as benign as it was first presented to be because we're watching some of these events in Anchorage and the conflicts that are happening up there and people actually establishing guards. So I know you think this is a dead issue, but it's still 2 months away and there's still time to think about it. I'm concerned because I have a lot of grandchildren, as a lot of you probably do too. I have children and grandchildren that frequent the park. And that was one of the big concerns last year, was the general public being subjected to something that they considered very inappropriate for children. So I'm bringing this up before you again. I've talked to Mayor Machicki about it for the borough in general, because this may not be the only place this kind of thing happens. But I don't know where you feel like you can draw the line on free speech. I mean, apparently what happened last year was considered okay for free speech, but it seems like the limits keep getting pushed farther and farther out. And where are we going to draw the line? It's not just that group, but are we going to allow screaming obscenities? Are we going to allow, things that should go on in private buildings by the private group to be done in public and basically forced on the majority of people that wouldn't want that going on? I feel like I'm the face of the silent majority, because in this particular event, this is a small group that's very politically active and very vociferous, and they look like they're a major element of our community. I feel like I am representing most of our community. So I just want you to consider this, that this issue may not be over yet. And thank you.
Any questions from the council? Thank you. Anyone else in the chambers wishing to speak? Please step forward, sir, and give your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Toby Burke and I reside south of Kenai. I'm a husband and father. I echo the same concerns as the previous speaker about the Pride in the Park event. I think ultimately it's not so much an issue of homosexual or LGBT rights as it's an issue of public decency. And I think it is part of a city governance to maintain high standards of public decency. And again, this is an event that's going on in a public park. It's not on private property. It's not in a closed building with closed access. It's in a public park with playgrounds for children. And I know part of the concern I've seen before articulated by this body has been that they didn't want to be the arbiters of what is decent and what isn't decent. But being realistic, we already do, and we always do. Every society has a line that's drawn of what we allow to be done or what's acceptable public behavior and what's not. And I think right now there's a very slippery slope. This Pride in the Park, if things are not reined in, if sideboards are not put on this event, like on any event, it's going to end up being, Pagan Fest in Soldotna. And I mean it in the sense of, where obscenity is not, that is allowed in public places where previously we'd say, no, this is a line that we have drawn. It's not crossed. If you want to do that, seek a private, venue. And so, again, there's a lot of people that are concerned. If sideboards aren't somehow, whether it's through the permitting process, if sideboards aren't put on this event, there's definitely going to be a sizable protest in front of the park. And there has been protests for the last several years along the parade route. But I think that the event crossed the line last year and the public knows that line has been crossed. So I think there'll be definitely more vociferous protests, during the event. There'll be an increased chance of conflict during the event. Not that people are looking for conflict, but people are looking for this body to maintain high public standards of decency. We all benefit by it, our children, families, every person benefits by high standards of how we comport ourselves in public. And I think this has, in many ways, this whole topic has been degenerated into, are you in favor of LGBT rights or not? And it's really not. It's really about public decency, and that irrespective of where we stand on that issue of whether we're heterosexuals or homosexuals, we still all have to abide by the same standards of decency. Thank you.
Are there any questions from the council? Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to just in the council chambers? Seeing none, I'll take a look at Zoom. And I see no hands raised in Zoom. Moving on to the next agenda item is Assembly and Legislature. Oh, they just raised their hand. Okay, we'll go back to that. Mr. Opperman, you're up. Please state your name and address for the record. Mr. Opperman? Mr. Opperman, you have 3 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record. I see you're unmuted, but we're not hearing you in here. Can you hear us? All right, I see you turned your hand raised off. Did you want to speak, Mr. Opperman? If you're speaking, we are not hearing you on this end. We are muted. Mr. Opperman, we can't hear you if you're speaking. We're going to have to continue on with our agenda. We'll try you again at the latter part of the meeting under other public comments. And hopefully by then we can be able to hear you. All right, moving on to the next agenda item is Assembly and Legislative Report. Are there any representatives of the borough or state in attendance who would like to speak? I see none here in the chamber, and looking at Zoom, I see no hands raised there either. So we'll move on to the next item, Administrative Reports, Auditor Presentation by Joy Mariner of BDO USA Limited Liability. And there you are. We're ready to go.
Here I am. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you again this year. Can you hear me okay? I want to be too close, but not too far away. It's hard to navigate. So nice to see you all this evening. My name's Joy Mariner. I've seen or met most of you before, but I serve as the lead engagement partner on the audit of the city. And we are reporting our results of the 2022 audit. And I'll go through just the required communications to you as the city council, as well as some highlights of the financial statements. One thing I'll just note for you is that you should have two documents. One is the audit wrap-up itself, and the other is your annual comprehensive financial report. I promise not to go through every page of this with you this evening, but this will be a good future read for you with the results of your 2022 financial statements. An audit, just by its very nature, is a look back at what happened during the year. We come in after the end of the year. We review the books and records to make sure that everything reported in here is supported by supporting documentation, invoices, paychecks, timesheets, contracts, approval from you as the council to make sure that it's within the budget constraints, those kinds of things. And so you really should not be necessarily making your decisions for the future off of this information, because it's a little old. This is from June, and you've done a lot since June, including passing a bond and issuing a bond, and the field house. We're pretty excited. For those of us who have kids in sports, I'm pretty excited to have the field house eventually completed. So there's a lot going on still at the city past the date of this report. But one thing I'll just say to start out with is you did not have any adjusting journal entries. So the audit process itself verified and can give you confidence that the financial information you're receiving regularly is sound, because we did not identify any errors or items that required adjustments in the financial statements as a result of our audit. We'll touch base on a couple key highlights, things that your team kind of worked through this year. But just, from a high level perspective, very clean audit, no audit adjustments. And we did not have any findings to report either as part of the audit. So don't check out yet, but if that's all you hear from me, that's the summary. Those are the key points. So let's start with the audit wrap up. I'm not going to cover this whole thing. A lot of this is just required communications for you. But page 5 is the status. So this is a completed audit. Third bullet point on page 5, it does note that we issued an unmodified opinion. That's the clean opinion that your funding agencies are looking for, that you as the council would want to see. And we also issued a clean opinion on your single audit. So your single audit is your audit of your federal grants. This year, you didn't hit the threshold for state single audit. And the reason you didn't hit the threshold is because they changed the rules. And some of the state funding that you've always gotten is kind of entitlement-like funding, where they help supplement your PERS contribution, your community, what we used to call community revenue sharing is now community assistance. Those sort of programs are now sort of scoped out when you determine whether you need to have a state single audit. Finally, the state's not making us do a lot of work over something that you're getting anyway. So we actually submitted a whole bunch of comments about, hey, this is a waste of everybody's time and money. You should make them not do this anymore. So you didn't meet the threshold. Going forward, where we're seeing state single audits now are largely if you got some sort of capital grant, which those have mostly dried up. And also emergency relief is funded at either 75-25, so 25% state funded. So communities with a lot of FEMA funding tend to have the state single audit. But otherwise, most of our single audits are on the state side are dropping off. Good or bad. I mean, if you started getting millions of dollars of state financial assistance, I'm sure you wouldn't complain, but you don't have to have an audit if you don't. But the federal side, we did issue an unmodified or a clean opinion on the federal single audit as well. And then the last point here, I say this every year, but at some point, Melanie will decide to retire. And at that point, you will hopefully have a great team behind her that's been working with her for years and can step into her shoes. It's a huge challenge for our local governments statewide. And actually, it's just a national problem. People staying in governments where there's not a pension anymore, where they can go private and make a lot more money. So somebody like Melanie, who's committed to her community and doing a great job, is a unicorn. I'll just say that. She did a great job. She put up with a lot this year with a new standard. And we worked really hard to get through with a lot of requests. And I'll just say, even turnover on her side. And on our side this year. So it was a challenge on both ends, and she does a great job, and her team stepped up to the plate. So they do that every year. And I know I say that this year was especially tough with the implementation of the new standard and some turnover challenges. I'll give the rest of your team, a shout out to. It does not just fall on Melanie's shoulders, but every person here at the city is involved in making sure your financials are correct. And I know Stephanie spends a lot of time looking at them. So that's going to be an important control to continue. As you go to the next page, 6, results of the audit. The big thing here that's changed is you have a new standard. And I've been talking about it for a couple of years. GASB 87 is now a word that nobody wants to even whisper. It's like he shall not be named. It's GASB 87. The lease standard sort of hit us a lot harder than we thought. It was a lot harder to implement than I think anybody had realized. And for you, this largely relates to your airport leases, because you lease property out at the airport. So there was a lot of work that your team did to evaluate those leases, what the terms are, how long the terms are, what's the rate, and then you actually discount it to present value essentially and record a lease receivable. So this is a big undertaking. This was an entry that Melanie was prepared for, but we helped walk through kind of actually calculating the discounting rate for her and for you. And so we'll look at the statements. I'll show you where that is. It doesn't actually change anything about how you receive that money. Money still comes in the door, the same amounts that they were before. It's purely an accounting and disclosure change. Let's touch base on page 8. I already mentioned no adjusting journal entries. Doesn't that look perfectly boring? That's what you want. And let's touch base on internal control. Internal control is an interesting, fun thing, right? And especially this year with Stephanie's departure, your controls will change. Those are the checks and balances to make sure things are going right and that your financial statements are correct. So where there's turnover, where there's big new changes, where there's a new field house, a bond issuance or any sort of weird things, and that's where having good internal controls and checks and balances are important. Melanie has a really good working relationship with us. So technical questions, she just calls us when she has questions about things. But that's going to be important as you move through this year to be asking your team, do you have the resources? Do you have the support you need? Do you feel comfortable reviewing, as Stephanie transitions out? So we do look very carefully at those checks and balances. Who's approving what? Can one person do something all entirely on their own? And so no findings to report to you in internal control. One thing that's changed on our end is that where we used to have things that we found that were maybe risks to you, but there were what we call compensating controls, other controls to catch errors. We didn't tell you about them because they were more like a kind of a risk that you had other things that would address them. In the accounting world or the auditing world, we're now telling you about them. So I have 2 items on the next page. These are not new to the city, but these are things that are very common, especially in Alaska, where you have a super user. imagine you can guess who it is. And this super user can access your IT system where your accounting records are held at an administrative level. Now, if you were to go out and hire a bunch more of accounting people and maybe an IT person whose whole job was just to help accounting, then you probably could have what we call segregation of duties there, where one person couldn't change their access or set up a vendor or set up an employee or change somebody's user rights. But right now you do have the situation where one person can do that. And actually, in your case, it's finance director and HR manager. And that access review is being done by the same people who have the access. So that's where we have these two items, that user access review as well as the access itself. Now, there's always a balance here. Do you just pay for a lot more people? Do you hire an external consultant to do this for you? In the moment when you need to pay a bill or add an employee, it's a lot functionally easier for one person to be able to do that. And it is an executive level where directors and officers insurance covers you. These people are, responsible folks. What I'll just kind of warn you about on that is where there's turnover or where there's a change in the future or where you have a concern, that's where you step in and say, hey, does it make sense for us to be limiting access? Or if somebody steps in an interim role who's not familiar with your system or has not been vetted, maybe that's when you say, hey, let's give them, more limited access to that. So I'm not asking you to be involved. It's not a finding. This is what we call a deficiency in the sense that there are segregation of duties that are not in place. But I don't want to ever be said I didn't tell you about something that's just a very common deficiency in the IT world. As I said, you do have what we call compensating controls. So other controls to check to make sure that that person isn't getting access to something. And in your case, it's really controls over money leaving the city. That's my biggest concern, that money doesn't leave the city unless it should leave the city. You're small enough, somebody's reviewing the payroll ledger before it goes out the door. Somebody's reviewing all the accounts payable. Somebody else is signing the checks. So that limits your risk to some degree, if that makes sense. So that's why that's in here. Get used to seeing them because now our attorneys, this one attorney people are telling us we have to have them in there, but it's not something that's a concern to me. It's just something I think you need to know is there. Questions on internal control before we move on? Okay, so this, the rest of the additional communication here are just required things we have to tell you about if we had disagreements or difficulties or, significant problems. We issued this a couple months later than we typically do because of that lease standard. And I think everybody in maybe the country, but I'm only limited to Alaska, definitely took longer than we all thought to evaluate your many leases. You have more than one. I think there were 20 something leases more. Oh, 70. Well, I only looked at 20 of them. We get to do this whole sampling thing. It's great. But your team had 70 leases. They have to discount each one separately. So it took longer to do that once the, kind of the audit started, and they all sort of piled up on us right at the same time. So that's where the delay getting it out still met all your deadlines and everything. I just, I wish we had started that process earlier on both sides. Would have made it easier for everybody. So your ACFR is your annual comprehensive financial report. Mostly I want you to know what's in here because I don't expect you to have memorized it yet. That's a job for another day, right? So on the very first page in the table of contents, let me just briefly show you what's in here so that you can use it as a reference tool this year. That's really what I'd ask you to do, is to use this as a reference tool. Your ACFR's got, one, you are not required to submit an ACFR. This is a best practice in government standards. You're required to submit a financial statement, but your team does that kind of next level where they provide more information and they get a certificate of achievement for doing this. It's I would say fewer than a third of the state in Alaska, the local governments in Alaska are still doing ACFRs. I think they're extremely valuable for you and for their communities. But the ACFR, the financial section of here is required for everybody, but the ACFR gives you additional information, including listing of officials, an organizational chart, transmittal letter. If somebody says, well, what is Soldotna? Maybe you're down at Nashville at a conference and somebody asks you that. Well, there's a summary right here. You can hand it to them. Financial section is our auditor's report. The management discussion and analysis, which is sort of a mini annual report. If you want to just find out a few comparative why, the why, you want to know the why, that's in MD&A. And then the basic statements are what you're paying me to audit. And then on the next page, you can see there's additional information. We have required information largely related to budget reporting and pensions. And then you have other information, which you're not necessarily required to submit for an audit, but for the certificate you do. And this is great historical information. If anybody ever wanted to go back however many years from now and see what was going on in the debt service fund or the, in the street assessment special revenue fund, you can get that detail here. You also have your federal awards. And then at the very end there on the third page of the table of contents, you can see the statistics. This is my favorite part. If I'm ever in your shoes, which someday I hope to be, maybe not in Soldotna, but someday I hope to be on the other side of the fence. This is where I'm going to live, here in statistics, because it's got some great information about where your tax revenues are coming from, what your debt by type are, your economic demographic statistics. So this is really informational. Throw this on your shelf, dust it off every now and then, and look at some of these statistics. I think you'll find them to be really helpful. Good talking points for papers too, in case you have to write papers about your community. And then our single audit reports are at the end. I'm not even going to talk about your single audit report because it's very excitingly boring. And we had no findings this year. I'll just mention that we did audit the airport improvement program, which is not a boring program to audit. FAA requirements are quite robust. So I'll give Kyle a little shout out because I think he feels audited after we audit AIP. We look at a lot on AIP. So let's talk about a couple of key highlights. And I'm going to flip to the fourth tab, which is the basic financial statements tab. I know there's a lot of numbers here. I'll just drill down to a couple key highlights. So assets are things that the city owns. Your assets are largely tied up in what we call property and equipment or capital assets. It's this building, it's some vehicles, it's your public utilities, those kinds of things. That's, really a, 154 million. It's being depreciated over time. So that's an estimate. You also have assets in cash and investments. Receivables are owed from others. And then you have some benefit plan related assets. Benefit plans are actually one of the OPEB plans that the state is overfunded. Can you believe it? That's why I have an asset in there. But you also do have this liability. So liabilities are things you owe to others. Liabilities there, 11.8 million, largely related to your net pension liability. You can't pay that off if you wanted to. And then you have some amounts in your compensated absences and some loans with DEC. Do note that that number goes way up next year with your new bonds that you issued in 2023. A new one that you'll see here is a lease related deferred inflow. And it's not the easiest way to see this, but the way that this works, and I mentioned it last year, is we're blowing up your balance sheet. In my opinion, maybe not for any good reason, but you now show in receivables, there's about $2.5 million of receivables related to those leases. That's GASB 87. So they add these receivables because you're owed this money over time on the lease. But because you're not recognizing it this year, they then turn around and put a liability on here too. So you have an asset and a liability that for the most part net out. And I can give you the actual numbers. At the end of the year, there was a receivable for 2.165 and that liability of that 2.106. So you've got about $2 million in receivables and in deferred inflows that net each other out. And the net effect to your income statement or to your funds is really a zero wash. It's a very insignificant difference. But it basically is requiring you to show this is how much we're owed on our leases over time. And any lease that's over a year, this is how much we're going to get paid in the future. Sort of, you've got $2 million to recognize in the future for leases that you've signed now. So that's a big change from this year. A couple other things I'll highlight on page 15. The general fund. I always like to look at my general funds with my councils. We look pretty carefully at the health of the general fund because this is really where your heart and soul lives. So your total fund balance at the end of the year was just over 17 million. It's a decrease of about 2 million, largely because of transfers that were made into into for capital type of purposes. But I really, when I look at that $11 million in unassigned, that's the number I watch pretty carefully. You have about 10.6 million in expenditures last year with about 11 million in unassigned. And so you've got about 1 year of expenditures available in unassigned fund balance. It's not restricted for something else. You haven't committed it for something else. And so that's something to just be kind of monitoring. And we don't need to go there necessarily, but we do have a whole footnote on fund balance. So if you want more information about that, talk to your team here or look through the notes, because the fund balance note is, I think, pretty helpful. That gives you an idea of kind of what your money is set aside for. And you've got another 5 million in fund balance under that committed that we have set aside by, I believe, policy here at the council level for unexpected events. So there's sort of this committed additional 5 million, another half a year essentially sitting there. And, none of us thought that would be necessary, but here we are post-COVID, and now we know it's good to have some money set aside for unexpected events. So that would be what I would consider be a healthy financial position with intentional decisions being made this year for things like capital. And you can see that change on page 17 at the fund level. So you can see what's going on with the general fund and some of your other funds on page 17. I think that's the other and last page I want to focus on here, is just make sure you can see it at least at the major fund level of what's going on. One thing I watch pretty carefully is the utilities and the airport. So both were in a positive revenues over expenditures. Keep in mind, this does not count depreciation. So it doesn't count the kind of use of those utilities over time, or the depreciating the asset depreciation as it's been used, right? So you do want to kind of watch for that, because user fees don't necessarily cover the cost of replacement. So building a reserve up for replacement is something to have on your radar. I'm sure your team Kyle is always watching that. So that's really where we stand on the financial statements. I'm happy to cover any specific notes or any questions you have on the numbers themselves, but I always appreciate my time here with your team and with you. And I'll be available for questions if you have any.
Any questions from the council?
And,
Nelson?
and if you don't mind, I just want to make a statement. Thank you for your presentation, by the way, but I just think it's an important thing to recognize. I have no doubt, that there was going to be any issues, and there certainly are no issues, but recognizing what all the city staff do to get to a point where you're not having issues in these reports. It sounds very boring, but it's really a year-long committed process, following good procedures and doing all those things and having the right people in there to give the correct information. Government runs on money. So I guess I just wanted to comment on that not a surprise, but definitely shout out to Melanie and your staff and administration for having a very good year, apparently audit wise. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I have one. I believe we put a freeze on any retirements from the finance department for the next 20 years.
Oh,
So we've got that.
that
covered.
sounds great. So then I can retire before you. I mean, that'll work out.
So about 20 years when you come back, that,
Yeah.
Mayor Whitney.
go ahead.
Yes, reiterate what Councilmember Nelson said, it's always great to read through this and see there's no significant changes. There's no matters noted relevant to the item. We're not aware of any consultations about accounting, no significant findings or issues. Then later on, there are no communication from regulatory agencies concerning non-compliance. No matter, there are no material transactions that haven't been properly recorded. Reading statements like that throughout the document definitely puts confidence in the work that Melanie and her staff and council member or city manager Queen have been doing here at the city over the years. So that's why they continue to get all those awards. And I do appreciate the annual comprehensive financial report, because it does provide us with more detail. And I do go through and look at some things in there.
Any other council comments? One quick one for the administration. Do we actually publish this the comprehensive financial report on the website or anything?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. We do. So the document will be available with the meeting notification as of right now for members of the public. But then if folks go to the finance department on the city's webpage, we actually publish the current year's ACFR as well as the previous 5 years. And we do the same with the popular annual financial report. So the current year PAFR as well as the previous 5, folks can look at those on the website. Anything prior to that, they'll have to come ask Melanie to go pull it from the shelf.
I guess one other comment, it's always nice to find out that the reports are boring. They're always the same from year to year. So that's.
I
that's-
try.
Boring is good. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
report. We'll see you next year, I guess.
Hopefully earlier.
Also under administrative reports, I have one here that says report from the administration.
Nothing additional to report today. Thank you, Mayor Whitney.
Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda is public hearings, and that'd be resolution 2023-023, authorizing the issuance of a letter of non-objection to the Marijuana Control Board for licensee renewal, Michael James Welsh, a retail marijuana store doing business as Cold Smoke, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to adopt? Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I would move to approve resolution 2023-0323, authorizing the issuance of letter of non-objection to the Marijuana Control Board for the license renewal for the Cold Smoke facility.
May I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Chosen. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. The memo in the packet on page 9 from City Clerk Blankenship summarizes that this is a standard annual renewal of an existing retail location in Soldotna. There is no objection from the borough in terms of tax compliance, nor is there any reason identified for objection from any of the city departments that reviewed this renewal, and therefore we recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Is there anyone here in the council chambers wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, we'll look at Zoom, and I see no hands raised at this point. So we will, having no one wishing to speak, the item is back before the council. Any council comments? We'll call for the vote.
Hutchins,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
Wackler,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Cassidy.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Resolution 2023-023 is adopted on a 6-0 vote. Moving on to the next agenda item, we are moving right along to mayor and council reports. Mayor's report and proclamation. No proclamations, but I do have a couple of comments. The first speaker we had said that the June 3rd was the Pride Parade. Is that correct?
Mayor Whitney, I would have to look it up. I'm not aware of the date that it's scheduled for.
Do we know if a permit's been issued yet?
I could answer that, but I would love to refer to you. It hasn't been issued yet. I know they've applied for it, but it hasn't been issued, and that is the tentative date that is on the application. Yes, June 3rd.
So has not come to the administration yet.
Mayor Whitney, I wouldn't be involved in issuing event permits at the park. We handle those through the Parks Department. That's routine and normal. And unless I requested to see a permit, it would not come across my desk.
I would ask that we find out if it has been issued. If it hasn't been issued at this point in time, maybe it should come before this council for the final approval. Moving on to the next, I'd like to thank the staff, especially the finance directors and her staff for the great job on the annual report. As I said earlier, boring is good. It's good to see that we receive the same thing year after year, a good report. Friday, they're at the Chamber of Commerce, the state someone from the state governor's office will be there to discuss the carbon, yeah, whatever's what's ever been presented. They're going to be discussing it there. So if anyone gets a chance, it'll be a joint meeting, 12 noon at the chamber, at the Sports Center. We have a joint meeting with Kenai and Soldat in the chamber. Earlier today, I believe it was, we all received an email from a student at SoHi requesting a speaker for a class there. Instead of all of us responding at once, I was wondering if anyone on the council would like to do that. And if so, Vice Mayor Parker.
I have reached out to her and have a date of April 19th where I will be
So
going and talking with the class.
yeah, Mr. Carey.
I just want to say I did it last year. It's awesome.
So Vice Mayor Parker will be doing that. That way we won't have 6 of us all standing there and responding to the same email. Next item I have on here is the March 8th meeting. I was here and listened to all the comments made. And the March 22nd meeting I attended by Zoom. And I must say that I was a bit disappointed that that ordinance didn't pass, ordinance 6, nor did the ordinance that was presented at the March 8th meeting. My personal feeling right now is without those ordinances passing, we're probably going to see some other contentious problems come up because of that. And that's all I have to say for now on that. Moving on to the next item is council reports, Planning and Zoning Commission. Mr. Chosen.
Before you move away from your report, can make a couple comments.
Go ahead.
So the presentation on Friday at the chamber lunch on carbon capture and sequestration, it's Department of Natural Resources Commissioner Boyle who will be making the presentation, and Department of Natural Resources has been taking the lead for the governor on this issue. Your comment with respect to park permits coming back to the council for approval, if it's not in the code, then why would we deviate and if just do it for one, but not all? So before bringing it to the council, I would like to see a change to our city code so that we're not just piecemealing and picking organizations here and there. And that's just my comments on that.
And I will comment on that. The last time this was approved, there was a lot of controversy about that. And our staff people got a lot of negative comments and voiced some unhappy things to those staff members. And I don't feel that this year they need to go through that again. It's a decision that should be made, brought to this council to make. It's been discussed. Usually when that's approved administratively, there's very little, if any, public comment or public input on that issuance of that permit. And I think at this point in time, it's something that should come back in front of this council for them to have some public comment, public input. So, Ms. Queen, you had your hand somewhat raised there.
Well, thank you, Mayor Whitney. I'd be happy to follow up with you afterwards. We approve, as you know, 70 large event permits annually and dozens additional. So I also share a concern. I would not feel comfortable selecting one event out of those 70 to bring to the council without a process indicating that that's the appropriate approval for that. So we want to be consistent. And I think a policy that guides which approvals are done administratively versus brought to the council would be appropriate prior to treating one event different from all the other events.
And as I said earlier, all the public comment we have had on both sides of this subject, I think it's something that needs to be done by this council. So moving on. Council reports, Planning and Zoning Commission, Mr. Chilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A brief recap from our April 5th P and Z commission meeting. There were two resolutions before the P and Z commission that evening. First was P and Z resolution 2023-009, which would recommend the granting of a conditional use permit to allow the expansion of an institutional healthcare facility located at 390 Lovers Lane. This resolution would be specifically supporting the ordinance that addresses the Aspen Creek Long-Term Care Facility. Right now, they are on their existing lot. They're trying to expand the building there, and just due to the nature of the expansion that they're looking at, that would require a conditional permit. And the expansion that they're currently proposing would be a 3,000 square foot expansion. And there is a dire need in the community to have additional space in these facilities to support our elderly community. I know right now, based on the feedback we got from the executive director who was in attendance that night, they have 37 people on their wait list at this facility. And I think that's something that we're seeing trend across the state, if not the nation. The commission reviewed this pretty in depth. The main concern that was brought forward is just the issue with traffic backing up there at the end of Lovers Lane due to the arrangement of the parking lot and having spaces right there at the entryway. It was almost postponed. However, the commission did make an amendment to the resolution where they would, as part of the conditional permit process, require that those parking spaces near the entryway would be pushed back. And then after making that change, the commission unanimously approved the resolutions recommending this conditional permit be granted. The second thing on the docket for that evening was resolution PZ 2022-008, which would recommend the approval of the Soldada Junction subdivision replat. This specifically was looking at three pieces of property kind of behind the Hutchins Auto Spa, kind of that near the Y area back there that are currently vacant. And there's a developer right now, I believe, that was looking at having those replatted to two parcels instead of three. And I believe the intent that was mentioned was to put some duplexes down there. And that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions from the council? There's one thing I did forget to mention. Progress Days is coming up. I believe it's the last weekend in July. Okay. In the past, we as the council have done the a booth there, for choice of better words. In the past, it's been a barbecue. We've done hot dogs and provided soft drinks and things like that. And I think that's something that we'll plan on going back to again this year, is doing the barbecue, 800 hot dogs. So mark that day down to be there, council to be there to pass out hot dogs and soft drinks and chips and stuff like that. I'm trying to find out if Coca-Cola would be willing to donate their little trailer that serves soft drinks. And so I believe I think that's the last weekend in July, Progress Days, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, then it's probably the weekend before. So moving along to the next agenda item, city manager's report, meter reading software communications issue update.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. There's a memo in the packet from Finance Director Imholt, just giving an update on the situation with our meter reading software, which allows us to remotely read water usage for our commercial metered customers. And we had to estimate rates as she describes in the memo, because there was a communication issue with the meters. We've been in constant communication with the firm Badger, which provides that service. And we were happy that they read correctly in the most current billing cycle. However, wanted to just give you an update that this is going to be something we continue to monitor, because at this point, we're still not satisfied with the explanation as to why the meters hadn't read previously. So we're going to continue to look into that to get representatives from that company on site. And we'll just keep you up to speed. But as of today's date, all of those customers have been correctly billed. We had 1 month where they were estimated, and then the most recent month where adjustments were made based on actual usage. So we'll continue to keep an eye on this, and it is causing us to think about replacements for a lot of these meters. They were implemented at the same time. They're now near the end of maybe what might be their original battery life. So it's good to start having conversations about maintenance moving forward and making sure that we're prepared for this situation if it were to arise again. Other than that, always happy to have Joy and Michelle and the folks from BDO here. As she mentioned, this was a more challenging audit year than normal, and it certainly stretched several months beyond what we would intend due to some changing in the accounting standards that put additional pressure on our team, certainly as the audit overlaps more with budget and additional things. But as always, we're happy to work with them, and they work well with our team, and they have open access to everything they need. And I appreciate their very independent and thorough analysis of not just our financial position, but the processes and procedures that are in place that hopefully give you that confidence in the team and in the numbers. Last thing, we are in budget mode. So internally, the departments had already submitted their budget request to the finance director. Melanie does a lot of pre-meetings with them back and forth. This week is when she and I meet with each individual department head and look through those requests. By next week, I anticipate Melanie will start compiling the budget and producing the document with our goal of presenting to the council in work sessions to be definitively scheduled, but I can tell you they're definitely going to happen on April 24th and 25th. So Clerk Blankenship had, I believe, emailed previously to get folks' availability for those days. Thank you for your flexibility so that we can make sure that we get these work sessions presented to you and the budget presented to you before the end of the month. And we will follow up tomorrow with an email on the exact times, but we're looking at the afternoon of Monday, the 24th, Tuesday, the 25th, to be able to work through all the department budgets, the non-departmental budget, and get you the information you need and the access to our folks to answer your preliminary questions. So we look forward to that. And that concludes my report.
When would we actually have the budget document in front of the council for approval?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. So we will do the work session, and at that point, we will have a document to share. I'll double check with Melanie. I anticipate she would intend to introduce the budget ordinance potentially at the second May meeting for a public hearing at the first June meeting. That would be our normal timeline. So we're on track for a normal timeline in terms of budget introduction and adoption. What we're doing is the work sessions a little bit earlier, and that's to fit those in prior to my departure in coordination with my successor, Jeanette. So we've discussed it, and that timeline is going to work. She's comfortable with it as well.
Any questions from the council for the city manager? Mr. Joseph.
Thank you. Just one follow-up question regarding the annual financial reports. It's always fantastic to see these come out. Do we have a timeline on the 2022 PAFR? I always look forward to that every year.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Chilson. The 2022 PAFR is done, and so we can email that to you. We probably do not plan on doing a big mass mailing unless the council feels strongly about that. And that's just due to my own comfort level about the fact that we're now many, many months beyond when the end of that report is covered. But we have the electronic version, and it's up on the website, and I'll get that emailed. We finished that up recently as we finished up these statements. And then if anyone feels about doing the mailing, we've got the budget for that. We can do it. I wanted to at least ask the question since we're a few months beyond when we would normally target to have that document completed.
That's great news. I'd love to see the report, and I will probably be in touch with you sometime after the meeting to discuss costs for doing something like that.
Do we have the capability of emailing that out to residents?
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Interesting question. I don't think we would have the ability, we wouldn't have an email list, but we could certainly push it out through our social media as well as make it really easy to find on our website.
Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda is public comments. Members of the public will have 3 minutes to comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment? Seeing no one here in the chambers, we'll move to the Zoom, and I see 2 hands raised. So first one we'll try is Mr. Opperman again. Can you hear us, Mr. Opperman?
Do you guys have me this time?
We can hear you now.
Oh, great. I apologize for that earlier. I must have obviously got the glitch fixed. I would like to, Larry Opperman, Soldotna, and I would like to commend the council for not passing 2023-006. And I was disappointed that it was not a unanimous decision to not approve that legislation. One of the things I'd like to say is, especially if you look at what's been going on in the state of Tennessee and what they have done, a state law now that prohibits the type of show that was shown last year in the park on Pride Day. And from my standpoint, that's not what America is about. It's a very different thing whenever you're talking about your personal beliefs, your personal religious beliefs. That is not what what legislation is supposed to do. It's almost impossible to legislate morality and moral behavior. And I just want to say, whether you do or don't agree with those folks, there's still a lot of consternation out there on a simple 8-second video when nobody was there. Everybody's getting worried about something that hasn't happened yet on June the 3rd. And I would recommend that everyone on the council attend that June 3rd Pride event and see what it's about without making comments or judgment on secondhand comments. And one of the things I did back last year was, that same group of folks that were in Pride in the Park here, they were out at the Alaska State Fair, if you remember. And I called the state fair and asked them if they had any protests out there with these trans people out there. They were interacting with children. The parents were there. There were no protests out at the state fair in the Valley, according to what the staff that work for the state fair told me. I talked to several people. So anyway, I just like to express once again, I commend you for not passing that 2023-006 and hope we can get this worked out. But please don't, specify a certain group to omit their right to free speech, and let's keep this America. Let's not do that. That's not what we're here for. And thank you very much for your time. And I apologize for that first try to get on. I'm not sure what would happen, but anyway, thank you very much for the time.
Any questions for Mr. Opperman? Thank you, sir, for your comments. The next one is a phone number of ending in 5783. Please state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes. Are you there, 5783? You're still muted. If you're on the phone participants dialing *9 on your telephone should unmute it. There you go.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. Please state your name and address for the record.
Hi. Yes, my name is Michelle Vasquez. I live in Soldotna. I am helping with the organization of the Pride event in June. I was extremely, surprised and taken aback by some of the comments that were made earlier in public testimony about things they think is going to happen, which again, we're getting into a lot of speculation about what is or is not going to happen. We are still in the planning stages of the event. But I must confess, my most distressed moment this evening was when, Mr. Mayor, you expressed desire to have the permit for the Pride event singled out and brought before the council for approval. I am absolutely stunned by that suggestion. I find that extremely discriminatory and singling this group out for something, A, that hasn't happened, B, that didn't happen last year. I don't know when this is all going to be. I thought after the ordinances and the resolutions failed, this would be over with, but apparently not. It's ongoing. Anybody can come to Pride, but also anyone can stay away. It's a one-time-a-year event for 3 hours in the park. If someone doesn't want to attend, they can stay home. That's the way I feel about it. We're not going to do anything illegal against the law, or untoward. It might not be to someone else's taste, but that's not the point. It's pride. Yes, we have been protested against, but we've never responded. The Queen's Guard is a nonprofit organization that I hope you do research on, because I don't know where the other person got their information about the Queen's Guard, but it was incorrect. And no, all the people attending Pride do not come from Anchorage or other cities. They come from this area. So I just wanted to express those things as a person who's involved in planning this event, that I am so deeply upset that we would be singled out on our permit. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Moving on to the next agenda item is council comments, and we'll start with Mr. Cassidy.
All right. Well, thank you for this opportunity to speak and be here. I don't have much to say, and I'll keep it short because I've got to get out of here soon. So our, let's see, in terms of sports, our seasons are starting slow. Our soccer team, baseball team, softball team, they're all complaining about the snow on our fields. They're slowly getting it out of the way. I think track is faring better than anybody because you can run inside or outside, although one is clearly better than the other. We had our first track meet, not last weekend, but the weekend before that, the Big C's at the Dome in Anchorage. I wasn't able to view the team overall result, but we did pretty well. We had a bunch of finishers in the top 10 and then many more in the top 20. So that was good. We're having prom. We're having prom this weekend. There's been a lot of setup to that. And a lot more groaning about setting it up from the students. Our class time in student council often is dedicated toward setting that up and getting it ready. I won't be able to attend, but I'm sure somebody will think it's great. That I think is it. Thank you.
I'm going to have this city manager here comment on just something you mentioned about the field, and we've had many discussions about it. So I'm let the city manager explain what's happened there and what is transpiring.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Yeah, a lot of, I would say, frustration with folks that there's still snow on Sohigh's field. I had shared an update with the council last Monday when we were getting some additional calls from folks. And I know that several of the teams and parents and coaches and other folks have been out on the field shoveling. The city does support the district and the borough by helping out and clearing some of the athletic fields. We've done that for decades. This year when we went out, Scott Sundberg, our maintenance manager, always does an initial assessment to make sure that the conditions are right, that for us to take our equipment out on the turf without potentially doing damage. And we did that this year, like we do every spring. Unfortunately, once we started blowing the field, our brand new blower has less than 200 hours on it, had a fuel pump failure. That equipment has been out of commission ever since. It's under warranty. We've got a plan to fix it, but it required that we use a backup piece of equipment to actually snow blow the field. And that didn't allow us to get as much snow removed as we would have liked. So it left a thicker layer of snow on the field that never did get a chance to melt completely. So we've been in constant communication with several of the coaches, with folks at the district, and continue to touch base and brainstorm whether there's a way through either our equipment or different equipment to support the sports programs and getting that cleaned off. I just got text today from Mr. Sundberg, and it sounds like there may be a plan coming together for some additional work this Saturday. I don't have the details, so I can't share that with you right now, other than to say we continue to work to identify solutions, supporting and helping getting that cleared for folks. I know it's a disappointment having some fields available, but other fields not. So appreciate the feedback from folks, appreciate the collaboration of our team and we'll continue working on it. And when I get more information about whether there's additional efforts this Saturday, I'll be sure to share those with the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hutchings. I'll agree with you on that one. Ms. Wackler.
Oh, me.
I want to say thank you to the people who commented. Obviously, we're still going rounds with the same subject. And I did want to kind of speak to how I definitely think that one of the basic tenets in the United States of America that we always say is that we treat everyone equally. And throughout this process, I've watched an effort be done to try to everything that is done and said is reiterated that everyone is going to be treated equally. And that's something that was very, very, very stringent set upon us by the city attorney, that every rule we do will be equally applied. And I definitely think it definitely has really bad optics to bring a singled out permitter in front of the council for approval. So I'm definitely against that action. But thank you guys for attending today, and I hope we actually have spring coming.
Mr. Carey.
No comment.
Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. And I appreciate, Mayor, you bringing that up and the reasoning behind it, because as the city manager shared, when we were kind of first starting talking about these issues, some staff, many that had nothing at all to do with this process, were mistreated, treated unkindly. And I think that as the comments by Ms. Queen and Vice Mayor Parker, I support those of potentially looking at a policy framework, bringing in a single permitter, as was just said. I'm very alarmed by that. I would not support any of that type of action, but a deliberate framework, I think, might be the way to go, as it's been discussed. So certainly up for that discussion.
Mr. Chosen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say thank you to city staff, our auditor team, and all the work that went into our financial reports this year. It's always an impressive feat to come back and have this presented before us and have a clean results on that. So deeply appreciative. And then also great news today to hear that we will be bringing back the council barbecue with Progress Days this year. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you back on the grill and passing out some hot dogs and just seeing the families come through this year. So looking forward to that. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Earlier today, I got an email and it was announcing the 2023 Truman Scholars that are awarded to individuals, one from each state. Some states get a couple. This Truman Scholarship has been awarded since 1977. So there are a lot of Truman Scholars in Alaska. And the recipient this year for the 2023 Truman Scholarship for Alaska is Sarah Mickelson from here in Soldotna, a SoHi grad, and she's currently attending school at Texas A&M. And when she finishes there, her desire is to go on to get her Juris Doctorate. But kudos to Sarah for receiving the Truman Scholarship. And a couple of years ago, you may recall Jackson Blackwell also received the Truman Scholarship. And there are others from here on the peninsula that are Truman Scholars. So congratulations to Sarah.
Thank you. One last comment. Next meeting, well, move on. Next item on the agenda is executive sessions, and there are none. Meeting announcements. April 19th, City Council work session at 12 p.m. I'm not sure what that's on.
Mayor Whitney, that's the Riverfront redevelopment presentation with the consultants to the council.
April 24th is the City Council budget work session, time to be determined. April 25th is also a City Council budget work session, the time to be determined. April 26th is the City Council meeting at 6 p.m. and that will be a very busy meeting. There will be a lot of public hearings on ordinances that we just had first reading on tonight. And it will be the city manager's last meeting. So we might have some surprises. You never know. So having nothing else on the agenda, nothing further in front of us, meeting is adjourned.